There are years in a person's life that pass quietly, leaving nothing behind but ordinary memories, the kind that blur together into a soft haze of routine. And then there are years that crack everything open. Years, I guess, that split a life into a before and an after, and nothing, not even the most cheerful holiday season, can fully paper over the fracture. For what it's worth, Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, the year 2024 was that kind of year. It was a year that tested them in ways no royal title, no ancestral wealth, no Kensington Palace press team could soften or manage. And look, it was a year that ended with a Christmas message so quietly powerful, so stripped of palace performance, that millions of people around the world felt it land somewhere deep in their chest, not because it was grand, but because it was real. To understand why that Christmas card and the messages surrounding it moved so many people, it's important to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of William and Catherine's love story, which is well known and much celebrated, but the beginning of that specific, brutal year. Because 2024 did not announce itself with any warning, it arrived the way the worst things often do, dressed as something ordinary. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had turned 42 years old on the 9th of January, 2024. It was a quiet birthday by royal standards, and the public marked it with warmth. The King and Queen shared a photograph from the coronation as a small tribute to her. Everything seemed normal, which William had just returned to his royal duties a couple of days earlier, and the Wales family appeared to be moving into the new year with their usual steady rhythm. But within a week, everything changed. On January the 16th, 2024, Catherine was admitted to the London Clinic, a private hospital near Regent's Park in the heart of London. Kensington Palace issued a statement the following day, confirming that she had undergone planned abdominal surgery. The statement was brief and carefully worded. It said the surgery had been successful, that Catherine was expected to remain in hospital for 10 to 14 days before returning home to continue her recovery, and that based on current medical advice, she was unlikely to return to public duties until after Easter. Most a lot. The palace stated clearly that her condition was non-cancerous. The public, basically, accepted this explanation, at least at first. Major surgery was serious, of course. People sent warm wishes, and there was concern, but not alarm. William temporarily stepped back from his own royal duties to be with his wife and their 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, and the palace asked for privacy during the recovery. That seemed entirely reasonable, and nobody wanted to push. A princess was healing. The world could wait. But the world, as it turned out, wasn't very good at waiting. Look, days passed, then weeks. I guess Catherine did not appear. There were no photographs, no carefully managed glimpses of a recovering royal stepping out for a short walk, no brief statement about improving health. The silence from Kensington Palace stretched into something that began to feel unusual. Royal watchers, who are accustomed to reading absences and statements like tea leaves, started to notice. Social media, never capable of sitting comfortably with an information vacuum, began to fill the space with theories. Some were sympathetic and concerned. Others were wild, conspiratorial, and frankly cruel. A portion of the internet convinced itself that something was being hidden, and that the palace was engaged in some elaborate cover-up. The speculation became relentless, almost feverish. William, for his part, was trying to hold everything together. He was caring for Catherine and the children, managing his own quiet grief and fear about his wife's health, all while publicly resuming some duties so that the world would see that the family was functioning. In late February, he was forced to pull out of a service of thanksgiving for his godfather, King Constantine of Greece. The palace cited a personal matter. No, it was later confirmed that the personal matter was Catherine's health. William T. B.H. wasn't with her in the hospital at that point. She had been discharged from the London clinic on the 29th of January and was recovering at home at Windsor. But the weight of everything was clearly affecting him. Then, in early February, a second blow fell on the family, one that the public could see. Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles III had been diagnosed with cancer. The king had been treated for an enlarged prostate around the same time Catherine was in hospital, and during that treatment, cancer had been discovered. The diagnosis was unspecified. The palace did not share what kind of cancer it was. But the news sent a shockwave through the United Kingdom and through royal observers around the world. The monarch was ill, and the heir to the throne's wife was recovering from major surgery, and two of the most prominent members of the royal family were facing serious health battles simultaneously. And still, Catherine hadn't been seen. The silence continued into March, and by that point, the public imagination had run completely wild. In what now seems like an almost unbelievable miscalculation, Kensington Palace released an official photograph of Catherine on Mother's Day, the 10th of March, which falls earlier in the United Kingdom than it does in other countries. The photograph showed Catherine sitting with her 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, all of them smiling. It was the first official image of the Princess of Wales that the public had seen since December. Prince William was credited as the photographer. The intention, clearly, was to show that Catherine was alive, present, and well enough to celebrate the holiday with her family. Within hours, it unraveled completely. Major international news agencies, including the Associated Press, Reuters, Getty Images, and Agence France-Presse, retracted the image. Their photo editors had spotted inconsistencies in the alignment of certain elements of the photograph, suggesting it had been edited, possibly in multiple places. The retraction was a devastating and public embarrassment. In Antibes' era of intense scrutiny of digital media and widespread distrust of institutions, and having a photograph officially distributed by a royal household pulled by wire agencies was the kind of event that set the internet alight. The theories doubled. The suspicion deepened. The following day, Catherine herself issued a rare personal statement. She signed it simply as C. In it, she apologized for any confusion the photograph had caused, explained that, like many amateur photographers, she occasionally experimented with editing. It was a gracious and human statement, but it did not quiet the noise. If anything, the admission that she had edited the photograph that was supposed to prove she was well, only intensified the questions. People wanted to see her. They needed to be fair, see her, which, and still, she did not appear. What nobody kind of outside the innermost circle of the palace knew at that point was the reason for all the secrecy, the reason for the absence, the reason for the edited photograph and the carefully measured statements. The reason William Leake had been carrying such visible strain in every public appearance he made. The family had received news that no family wants to receive. Post-operative tests had returned results that nobody had expected. The surgery that had been planned, successful, and described as addressing a non-cancerous condition had revealed something far more serious in the tissue that had been removed. More cancer had been present. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, 42 years old, mother of 3 young children, future Queen of England, had been diagnosed with cancer. For weeks, she and William had been processing this privately. They had been trying to find the right words, the right moment, the right way to tell their children, George, who was 10, Charlotte, who was 8, and Louis, who was 5, something that no child should have to hear about their mother. And they had been, honestly, in discussions with Catherine's medical team about the course of treatment that lay ahead. They had been sitting with a fear that has no rank, no protocol, no royal precedent for how it should be managed. Cancer doesn't care that you're the Princess of Wales. It doesn't adjust, TBH, its behavior, because cameras are pointed at you. It arrives on its own terms, without permission, without apology. The decision was eventually made to go public, not because the palace wanted to, not because the press had forced the family's hand in any meaningful way, but because Catherine herself understood the magnitude of what she was carrying, and she understood that silence was no longer something she could sustain without it becoming its own kind of damage, to her family, to the public trust, and to the many thousands of people around the world who were going through exactly the same thing, alone, without the support of any palace or any institution, and who deserved to know they were not the only ones. On the 22nd of March, 2024, Catherine released a video message. It was filmed 3 days earlier at Windsor. In it, she sat alone and spoke directly to camera. She was dressed simply. She looked composed but not guarded. There was a vulnerability in her face that no royal training produces. She told the world that in January, she had undergone major abdominal surgery in London, and that at the time, her condition had been thought to be non-cancerous. She said the surgery was successful, but then she delivered the words that stopped the world in its tracks. Tests after the operation, she said, had found that cancer had been present. Her medical team, I think, had advised that she undergo a course of preventative chemotherapy, and she was now in the early stages of that treatment. She described the diagnosis as a huge shock. So she spoke of William. She said that the two of them had been doing everything they could to process and manage the news privately for the sake of their young family. She talked about the conversations they had needed to have with George, Charlotte, and Louis. How much time it had taken to explain everything to them in a way that was appropriate for their ages, to reassure them that she was going to be all right. She honestly said she had told her children that she was well and getting stronger every day, focusing on the things that would help her heal in mind, body, and spirit. And she asked, with a dignity that was unmistakably her own, for time, space, and privacy as she worked through this treatment and recovery. The world's response was immediate and enormous. Kensington Palace was flooded with messages. Social media platforms lit up with an outpouring of support that crossed every language, every time zone, and every national boundary. World leaders offered their thoughts. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said Catherine had the love and support of the whole country. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sent his wishes to the princess, her children, and the entire royal family. King Charles, who had been fighting his own cancer battle, released a statement through Buckingham Palace, saying he was so proud of Catherine for her courage in speaking as she had. He had been in closest contact with his daughter-in-law since they had both received treatment at the same London hospital, and he and Queen Camilla would continue to offer their love and support to the whole family. Even Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, estranged from the family and living far away in California, issued a statement wishing health and healing for Catherine and the family. But beyond the official statements and the celebrity reactions, the response that mattered most came from ordinary people. From women sitting in hospital waiting rooms who had received the same kind of diagnosis, felt for the first time that a face they recognized was sitting in the same waiting room with them. From men who, to be fair, had watched their partners go through chemotherapy, who understood the particular kind of helplessness that William's face had carried for months without any of them knowing why. From parents of young children who had lain awake at night, trying to find the right words for the same impossible conversation. Look, from survivors, from the newly diagnosed, from the frightened, and the grieving, and the cautiously hopeful. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had stepped out from behind the palace gates, not physically, in the only way that truly matters, and she had told the truth. And the truth, delivered with that kind of plainness and that kind of courage, but it doesn't stay contained. TBH, it travels. It finds people in the places they least expect to be found, and it reminds them that even in the palaces, even in the most carefully managed lives, in the most photographed family on earth, the human things are the same. The fear is the same. The love that drives people to protect their children from hard news is the same. The longing to sort of be well, to come back to ordinary days, onto school runs and holiday dinners, and the unremarkable gift of a normal Tuesday is the same. The year was only 3 months old. There were 9 more months to go. And ahead of Catherine lay one of the longest, hardest roads a person can walk. The road of cancer treatment, of chemotherapy, of not knowing, of waiting for results, of good days and bad days, and the particular exhaustion that no amount of willpower can entirely override. And ahead of William lay the experience of watching someone he loved walk that road while carrying the weight of a future kingdom on his shoulders. Ahead of their children lay a year of childhood marked by something no child should have to carry. And ahead of the British public and the millions of people around the world who had been following this story with a concern that surprised even themselves, lay a year of watching and waiting and hoping. Nobody knew sort of, yet how the year would end. Nobody could see what December would look like, or what kind of photograph would eventually be released as a Christmas card, or what a few simple words on a holiday greeting could do to the hearts of the people who received them. That was all still ahead, still unwritten, still waiting on the other side of a long and difficult road that had only just begun. Spring came too. Windsor slowly, the way spring always does in England, not with any great announcement, but in small signs that a person had to look for deliberately. A tree that had been bare the week before suddenly showing the faintest suggestion of green along its branches. Light staying a few minutes longer in the evening, the cold not quite so certain of itself as it had been in February. For Catherine, the Princess of Wales, that spring was passing almost entirely out of sight of the outside world. Look, she was at home. She was, recovering from surgery. Well, and she was beginning chemotherapy. And she was doing all of this with the cameras nowhere near her, which was, for a woman who had spent the better part of her adult life in one of the most photographed families in history, both a mercy and a strange kind of isolation. The palace had asked for privacy, and for the most part, the British press, which hasn't always been known for its restraint where the royal family is concerned, gave it. There were occasional paparazzi photographs, also including one taken in mid-March, showing Catherine in a car near Windsor, wearing sunglasses, sitting in the passenger seat, while her mother Carol drove. Most major British news outlets chose not to publish that photograph. The gesture was quiet and small, but it wasn't honest. Even in a media situation defined by the relentless hunger for access, there were lines. And for a period in early 2024, those lines held. William, meanwhile, was navigating the particular difficulty of a man who must maintain a public face while his private world is in the middle of a storm. He returned to royal duties in mid-April after the Easter holidays. His first official engagement after the weeks of absence was a visit to a food charity. When he arrived, well-wishers had gathered not only with cards and messages of support for Catherine, but also for his father, King Charles. William received them with evident warmth and visible gratitude, though beneath the practiced ease of a man who has been trained for public appearances since childhood, the strain was there for those who were paying attention. He thanked people for their kindness. He told one person, in response to a question about Catherine, that she was doing well. He said it simply, without elaboration. But the words themselves, "she's doing well," carried enormous weight, because for months, nobody had known anything at all. Over the following weeks and months, the public received small updates, each one measured and carefully limited. In I guess May, William visited the Isles of Scilly and said again that Catherine was doing well. In TBH, June, Catherine herself released a written statement. A photograph accompanied it, taken by photographer Matt Porteous. It showed her standing under a willow tree in a light-colored blazer and jeans, looking calm and composed. The statement was honest, in a way that royal communications rarely are. She said she was making good progress, but she wasn't out of the woods yet. She acknowledged, kind of, that there were good days and bad days. She actually said that on the bad days, a person felt weak and tired and had to give in to the body's need to rest. There wasn't anything polished or performative about those words. They sounded like someone who had learned things about herself that she had never expected to learn, and who was reporting those things plainly, without the protective varnish of royal language. That same month, June of 2024, Catherine made her first significant public appearance since the cancer diagnosis. She attended trooping, I guess, the color, the annual ceremony marking the king's official birthday, one of the most traditional and most watched events in the royal calendar. She arrived in a carriage. She appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, alongside William and their 3 children. She was wearing a white dress, and she looked, to the eyes of the world, which had been deprived of any sight of her for 6 months, like someone who had been through something enormous and was still standing. The crowd's response was overwhelming. People who had gathered along the parade route cheered with a fervor that went well beyond ordinary royal enthusiasm. It was the kind of cheering that contains relief, that particular sound that a crowd makes when it's been collectively holding its breath and is finally, ungratefully, allowed to let it go. George, Charlotte, and to be fair, Louis were on the balcony too. George, the eldest, with the measured composure of a boy who has been told since birth that he carries the future of a monarchy. Charlotte, with the particular quality of self-possession that had always made her seem, in some fundamental way, older than her years. And Louis, the youngest, 6 years old, entirely incapable of standing still for any meaningful length of time, and wholly beloved by a public that found in his unbothered cheerfulness an antidote to the weight of everything else. The family was there, visibly, unmistakably there, together. King Charles was also at trooping the color that year, though he rode in a carriage rather than on horseback, in recognition of the fact that his own treatment was ongoing. The 2 cancer diagnoses, the monarch and the future queen consort, both fighting quietly, both continuing to show up, gave the ceremony a different texture than it had ever had before. People watching it understood that what they were witnessing wasn't merely ceremony. It was, something more stubborn than that. Something that insisted on continuance even in the presence of illness. The flags TBH and the uniforms and the horses and the music had always been there. But in 2024, underneath all of it, there was a story about what it means to keep going. Through the summer, Catherine continued her treatment. In August, she, TBH, appeared briefly in a video message alongside William, congratulating Team Great Britain on their performance at the Paris Olympics. She was photographed in a car on the way to church at Balmoral, where the family joined the King and Queen for the August bank holiday weekend. These glimpses were rare, and they were clearly managed. Nobody was going to get an unguarded paparazzi shot of Catherine during chemotherapy, and the palace wasn't going to release one either. But they served a purpose. They told the public that she was still here, still present, still a part of the world even, as she was largely removed from its public demands. Then, on the 9th of September 2024, everything shifted again. Catherine released another video message. This one was different from the one in March. Different in tone, different in setting, different in what it carried. Where for what it's worth. The March video had been quiet and still. This one was alive with movement and warmth and something that looked, unmistakably, like relief. The family appeared together, Catherine and William, and George, Charlotte, and Louis, walking through the countryside near their Anmer Hall home in Norfolk, sharing a picnic, existing in the world with the kind of ease that illness temporarily robs a person of, and that recovery, slowly, gives back. The footage had been filmed in August, in the lush green of the Norfolk countryside, and it had a quality that was entirely different from any official royal video that came before it. It felt like something a family had filmed for themselves, something private that they had decided to share. In the video, Catherine delivered the news that the world had been waiting for through every long, uncertain month of 2024. She had completed her chemotherapy treatment. She said that the last 9 months had been incredibly tough for the family. She said, that life, as they knew it, could change in an instant, and that they had had to find a way to navigate stormy waters and a world unknown. She described the cancer journey as complex, scary, and unpredictable for everyone, and especially for those closest to the person going through it. And I guess then, in words that would be quoted and shared around the world, she spoke about what the experience had given back to her alongside everything it had taken. She said the time had above all reminded her and William to reflect and to be grateful for the simple yet important things in life, the things that so many people often take for granted. She said, of simply loving and being loved. The phrase was small, which 4 words at the center of a longer sentence, but they honestly landed on the world the way that only the most honestly spoken truths can land, not because they were unexpected, but because they were the exact right words for exactly the right moment. People you know had been watching this family for 9 months, not because of their titles or their wealth or the institutional significance of the monarchy, but because something very human and very recognizable was happening to them. And Catherine had named it. She had taken 9 months of fear and uncertainty and hard work and quiet courage, and she had distilled it into something anyone could carry. The reminder to be grateful for simply loving and being loved. She also acknowledged, with characteristic honesty, that completing chemotherapy wasn't the same as being finished. She said that although she had finished her treatment, her path to healing, full recovery was basically long, to end that she must continue to take each day as it came. She said she was looking forward to being back at work. She said she entered the new phase of recovery with a renewed sense of hope and appreciation of life. William, watching her say this, looked the way a person looks when they've been afraid for a very long time, and the ground beneath their feet is just beginning to feel solid again. The public response was once again vast and immediate. The video was watched tens of millions of times within days. Comments arrived from every corner of the internet, from cancer survivors who recognized the exact quality of that relief, from caregivers who had watched a partner or parent walk the same road, from people who had no personal connection to illness at all, but who found themselves unexpectedly moved by the sight of a family sitting in a field, sharing food, and looking, for the first time in a long time, like they were simply happy to be alive. Prince William, the following day, was scheduled for a solo royal engagement in Wales. He arrived to be met by crowds carrying cards and flowers and good wishes. When people honestly asked about Catherine, When they told him they were glad she had finished treatment, William received each expression of care with a warmth that was clearly not performance. He said quietly, and without any of the grandeur that the moment might have invited, not that it was good news, but that there was still a long way to go. It was exactly the right thing to say. Honest without being dark, grateful without being falsely reassuring. And it told people who were paying attention something important about what kind of year this man had had. He, had stood at public engagements for 9 months, carrying knowledge the public did not yet have, or knowledge the public had, whose full weight only he could feel, and he had shown up, and he had done the work, and he had kept going. And now he was standing in a Welsh street in September sunshine, telling people that his wife was better, with the particular careful joy of a man who knows that getting better and being healed aren't the same thing, and who isn't going to pretend otherwise. September moved into October. Catherine attended her first official royal engagement since the cancer announcement, a visit to Southport, alongside William, where they met with bereaved families following a horrific knife attack earlier in the summer that had killed 3 young girls. It was an engagement of enormous emotional weight, and Catherine's presence at it said something. She could have eased back into public life through something gentler. She chose, in my opinion, instead to be in a room with grieving parents, to offer whatever presence and witness she could to people who had lost the most unthinkable things. She was photographed embracing a member of the crowd outside the chapel, her arms wrapped fully around someone she had only just met, in the way of a person who has spent several months understanding at a deeper level than before what human warmth means and what the absence of it costs. November came, and Catherine attended the Festival of Remembrance and the Remembrance Day service at the cenotaph. These were not light engagements. Plus, on the Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall, with its thousands of gathered veterans and its falling poppies, and its music that carries the weight of 100 years of grief. This wasn't a place a person showed up to if they were not ready, and she was there. Wearing the kind of quiet elegance that has always been her signature, standing beside William, listening, honoring. The public watched and understood that something had shifted. Not basically, just in the calendar, but in the air around this family. Something had been tested this year. Something had held. Plus, December arrived. And with December came preparations for the annual Together at Christmas Carol service at Westminster Abbey, a tradition Catherine herself had started in 2021, and which had grown over 4 years into one of the most anticipated events in the royal Christmas calendar. The service, broadcast on Christmas Eve across the United Kingdom, brings together people from all walks of life, survivors, helpers, community workers, those who have given extraordinary service in quiet corners of the country. It is, in, I think, its own way, one of the most honest things the royal family does. It isn't a ceremony of power. It is an invitation to gather. In the days before the service, Catherine released a Christmas letter to those who would be attending. It was a letter about love, but not love in the abstract, one decorative way that the word is often used. It was love described with the specificity of someone who has learned it again recently, from necessity. She actually wrote that Christmas gave people the opportunity to slow down and reflect on the deeper things that connect them all. She wrote that when people stopped and took themselves away from the pressures of daily life, they found the space to live with an open heart, with love, kindness, and forgiveness. She wrote that love was the light that could shine bright even in the darkest times. Those words, the light that can shine bright even in the darkest times, were clearly written by a woman who knew what dark times felt like, not metaphorically, not theoretically, from the inside of them. On the 6th of December, the service was held. Catherine arrived in a red coat with a black bow and black boots. She was photographed making her way into Westminster Abbey, with her head up, her manner composed, and her presence unmistakable. William and the children walked separately into the Abbey. Inside, the family sat together. George, Charlotte, and Louis alongside their parents in that ancient space made warm with candlelight and carol singing. At one point during the service, Catherine was seen helping little Louis light his candle from Charlotte's. It was a tiny gesture, barely noticed among the grandeur of Westminster Abbey, but it was the kind of detail that people remembered, the kind of detail that makes the enormous intimate. William stood and read a prayer during the service. He spoke, of light shining in darkness, of a child born into the world as a gift. Standing in Westminster Abbey in his suit, reading those words in the week after a year that had been, in his own unguarded word, dreadful. There was something in his bearing that the people watching could feel. He had carried something heavy through the year. He was still carrying some of it. But the carrying had changed, and it was no longer the carrying of not knowing. It was the carrying of a man who knows what he nearly lost, and hasn't lost it, and doesn't intend to forget what that knowledge feels like. After the service, walking outside in the winter air, Catherine was photographed in a full embrace with a woman she had just met, a cancer patient who had been among the invited guests. The two of them held each other. There, were no cameras set up for the moment, and no press officer arranging the shot. It just happened, the way genuine things happen, unrehearsed and unmanaged. And it was that photograph, more than almost any other image from that December, that told the true story of who Catherine had become in 2024. Not a Princess of Wales performing compassion. A person who had been in the same dark corridor as the woman she was holding, and who reached out her arms because she understood what it meant to be reached for. By the time December settled fully over Britain, the royal family had been living inside a year that felt, in some ways, like several years compressed into 12 months. Pretty much, the country sensed this. I guess royal watchers sensed it. Even those who paid only passing attention to the monarchy had a vague awareness that something unusual had unfolded in 2024, that the family at the center of the nation's most public institution had been quietly fighting private battles that most families fight in the dark, and that the battles were not entirely over, but that they were, against the odds, and with considerable grace, being won. It was against this backdrop that on the 19th of December 2024, Kensington Palace released the annual Wales family Christmas card. For a moment, before anyone had fully seen it, there was the familiar anticipation that greets every royal Christmas card. The guessing game about who would look different, who would be wearing what, whether the children would be wearing matching outfits, which photographer had been given the honor of capturing the image. These were the usual questions. But when the card appeared on the Wales family's social media accounts and was shared by the palace, the usual questions fell away, because the photograph wasn't usual at all. It showed the 5 of them, William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis, sitting together outdoors. All of them were smiling. All of them had their arms around each other, or leaning into each other, in the way of people who have spent a great deal of time in very close proximity, and who have learned the particular angles of each other's shoulders, and know without thinking where to rest a hand or tilt a head. Charlotte had her arms wrapped around her mother's neck, and her older brother George's neck at the same time, pulling them toward her with the determined affection of a 9-year-old who has decided that the people she loves should be physically close to her. Louis was cuddled close to his father. Catherine sat at the center, between her husband and her daughter, looking like someone who is exactly where they want to be. What gave the photograph its particular power The power that made it not just a pleasant holiday image, but something that stopped people mid-scroll and made them feel something, was what those who knew the story understood about where it came from. The photograph wasn't taken by a professional photographer for the Christmas card. It was a still frame taken from a video. And the video, I think, it came from was the one that Catherine and William had released in September, the one filmed in August at Anmer Hall in Norfolk, in the green countryside, when I think the family was walking together and sharing a picnic and simply being a family again after the longest and most frightening stretch of months they had ever known together. The choice was deliberate, and it was meaningful. The palace and the family had access to many images. Royal families are photographed constantly, and there's never any shortage of usable material. But they chose this one. They chose a frame from the video that had announced to the world that Catherine had finished chemotherapy. They sort of chose a moment of reunion and relief and ordinary outdoor happiness from the summer that had been the long-awaited other side of the darkest winter. In placing that image on their Christmas card, they were not just sending a holiday greeting. They were sending a message about what the year had been, what it had cost, and what it hadn't taken from them. The card's message was simple. Inside it read, "Wishing you a very happy Christmas and New Year." On social media, the caption was even shorter. "Wishing everyone a very happy Christmas," followed by a small Christmas tree symbol. There was no grand statement, no lengthy reflection, no official summary of the year's events. Just those words, spare and warm and entirely direct, placed beneath a photograph. That contained, for anyone who knew how to read it, everything a statement could never fully say. There was one small additional detail that drew attention and a degree of affectionate online commentary. The card, as originally posted, was quietly deleted within minutes of its first appearance, then reposted in a slightly updated version. This one featuring a gentle animation of snowflakes drifting across the image and soft, twinkling lights. It was a minor digital adjustment, but it gave the card something that no previous Wales Christmas card had featured. Movement. Snow falling across a still image of a family. Light blinking softly. It was, in a small and sweet way, the most alive a Christmas card had ever looked. The response online was immediate and vast. The comment, "You know," sections filled within minutes. "Merry Christmas to this beautiful family," one person wrote. "It's been a rough 2024, but you've made it through together. 2025 will be full of health and joy. We love you all." Another wrote, "A beautiful card that marks an important moment for the family." A third, "Happy Christmas, Your Royal Highnesses. I hope the joy of Princess Catherine's recovery makes this the most special one yet." Here's the thing. What was striking about the responses, and there were hundreds of thousands of them, was how personal they were. People were not commenting on the card the way people usually comment on royal photographs, fine with the standard expressions of formal admiration or generic goodwill. They were writing the way people write, when something has touched something real in them. They were writing about their own cancer diagnoses, their own family members, their own years that had been brutal and uncertain, and somehow survived. They were writing the name Catherine with a familiarity that hadn't been there before the March video, before the long months of treatment, before the September announcement. Something had changed in the relationship between this family and the world. That watched them, and the Christmas card was the last page of the chapter in which that change happened. The card arrived in the context of several other deeply moving gestures from the family in December. Catherine's Christmas letter, written for those attending the Westminster Abbey carol service, and subsequently shared publicly, had spoken of love with an eloquence born entirely from experience. And she had written that it wasn't just at Christmas, but every day of their lives that love was the greatest gift a person could receive. Love that listens with empathy. Love that's kind and understanding. And love that's forgiving. Love that brings joy and hope. These were not platitudes lifted from a speechwriter's file. These were the, to be fair, words of a woman who had spent the year finding out, at close and personal range, in what love in its most practical and sustaining form actually looked like. In the form of a husband who held things together, in the form of children who needed to be reassured and protected, in the form of doctors and nurses who had given her back something that illness had tried to take. That Christmas, at Sandringham, the family gathered with the extended royal family for the annual church service at St. Mary Magdalene. William and Catherine walked with the King and Queen. George, Charlotte, and Louis walked with their parents, the children carrying the unself-conscious energy that children bring to every occasion, regardless of its historical weight. Outside the chapel, Catherine was again seen embracing people from the crowd, including a cancer patient who had come to see the royal walkabout, clutching cards and small gifts, and the simple need to feel some connection to the woman whose public journey had so closely mirrored their own private one. The hug was long. I'm kind that means something. King Charles, in his own Christmas address that year, spoke from a former hospital chapel, a deliberate departure from tradition, and one that wasn't explained, but did not need to be. He spoke about the selflessness of doctors and nurses. He said that he and his family had been continually impressed by those who dedicate their lives to helping others. And then he added, from a personal point of view, that he offered special and heartfelt thanks to the selfless doctors and nurses who had supported him. Other members of his family through the uncertainties and anxieties of illness that year, and who had helped provide the strength and care and comfort they had needed. He was standing in a chapel that had once been part of a hospital, thanking the people who had saved his life and the life of his daughter-in-law. It was, like so much of that December, a moment that worked on multiple levels simultaneously. In basically a trip to South Africa earlier that month, William had spoken to reporters in a rare moment of unguarded candor. When asked about the year, he had said that 2024 had been, in his own word, brutal. He had said that honestly. It had been dreadful. Probably the hardest year of his life. That trying to get through everything else and keep everything on track had been really difficult. And he had then said something that clearly cost him something to say in public, not because it was untrue, but because it was deeply private, that he was so proud of his wife, that he was proud of his father, and that he was proud of the way each of them had handled what they had been given. A man who has spent his entire life in public, who was introduced to cameras before he could speak, who lost his mother in front of the world and processed that grief in the world's full view. That man had stood in South Africa and said he was proud of his wife. And the people who heard it understood that those words came from somewhere no press secretary had shaped. They came from a year of sitting in rooms where the world had no access, of carrying fear through engagements where he had to look composed, of coming home every night to children who needed their father to be steady, out of watching the woman he loved fight something terrifying with a grace that surprised even him. The pride in his voice when he said it was the pride of a person who has seen someone tested and has watched them pass the test. The question that surrounded the Christmas card, the question that surrounded all of the family's gestures in December, wasn't whether they were genuine. That wasn't in doubt. The question that people found themselves turning over was a quieter and more interesting one. What does it mean that so many people, in so many countries, in so many different circumstances, were so deeply moved by a photograph of a family sitting together? What does it say about the world, about the particular moment in history through which these events unfolded? That a Christmas card from a royal palace made grown adults cry in their kitchens. And part of the answer lies in what the year had been, not just for the Wales family, but for millions of people watching. 2024 had been, in many parts of the world, and for many kinds of people, a year of difficulty. Illness, loss, uncertainty, the accumulated weight of a world that doesn't slow down to allow for private grief. And here was a family. The most watched family on earth, yes, but also undeniably a family who had been through something real and come out the other side of it holding on to each other. The photograph on the Christmas card wasn't staged. In my opinion, it wasn't manufactured warmth. It was what warmth actually looks like when it's been tested, when it survived something. Part of the answer also lies in Catherine herself. Over the 12 months of 2024, she had made a series of choices that were not typical of public figures in her position. When, to be fair, she could have retreated entirely and remained silent until she was well. She spoke, and she spoke plainly. When she could have allowed the palace machine to manage the narrative entirely. Reduce her to a series of official statements issued in the third person. She wrote her own words and signed them herself. When she could have emerged from chemotherapy looking rested and composed and packaged for maximum reassurance, when she released a video of her family walking in a field and said simply that she was relieved and grateful and that the journey was still ongoing. These were not the choices of a person managing a public image. They were, I think, the choices of a person who had decided that the truth, offered with honesty and without performance, was the most valuable thing she had to give. And then there was the love that ran through everything Catherine said and did in that December in particular. And her Christmas letter had been about love. Her carol service had been about love. Her embrace of the cancer patient outside the chapel had been an act of love. The photograph on the Christmas card, the frame frozen from the September video, showing a family that had come through, was a document of love. Not the grand romantic kind, not the kind that makes good cinema. The ordinary working kind that shows up every morning and asks what's needed and doesn't leave when things become frightening. She had written in that September video that became the source of the Christmas card photograph, of simply loving and being loved. 4 words, plus enough to contain an entire year. The Christmas card was shared and reshared in the days following its release. It appeared on phone screens in living rooms and hospital waiting rooms and kitchens and offices across the United Kingdom and beyond. Some people printed it out. Some people sent it as their own Christmas card, attached with a note about why it mattered to them. Cancer charities shared it. Support groups for caregivers shared it. People who had no particular connection to the royal family shared it because something in the image spoke to something in their own lives. The family sitting together with their arms around each other, the snow falling gently across the image, the simple words, the profound, ordinary fact of being alive and together at Christmas, when the year had spent several months suggesting that things might end differently. What William and Catherine sent out into the world in December 2024 wasn't, at its heart, a Christmas card at all. It was something older and simpler than that. It was a witness. It was a record. It said, "We were here, and we were afraid, and we held on, and here we're." It said, "The look, hard year ends, and the good one comes." It said, "In my opinion, the light gets through." And in saying all of that through a single photograph of a family sitting together in a field, it reached across every difference of language and culture and circumstance, and found the part in millions of people that understood exactly what it meant. Because that's, in the end, what the message was. Not a royal message, not a palace message, a human one. The oldest kind theirs, and the kind that needs no title, no institution, no crown to carry it. The actually kind that says, love each other. Be grateful for simply loving and being loved. The world, which had been watching and waiting and hoping for 12 long months, received that message and held it close. And in homes and hospitals and quiet rooms across the globe, people who had also been holding on through their own difficult years understood, without needing any explanation, exactly what the Prince and Princess of Wales were trying to say.